The votes are in, and in this video I have Hearthstone's most hated card, and you'll never guess what it is. No, you'll totally guess. It's super obvious. But the other 9 cards, some of those might surprise you. For instance, the 3 behind me here didn't even make the top 10. These are numbers 11 through 13. How soon we forget the deck of lunacy problems of old in the modern days of Quest and Stormwind and Hero Card Hearthstone. There's a lot more to hate these days. So just to recap, I asked all of you to vote on a bunch of different categories. This is the most hated card, and over the next 4 or 5 days or so, we'll be covering other categories like most beloved cards and the strongest cards and the most hated decks and so on. So stay tuned over the next week as we jump into this yearly recap of the calendar year of Hearthstone. But for now, let's talk about the most hated cards. And at number 10, this totally shocked me. It's Shadow Word Void from Duels. If you don't recognize this card, it's a Duels card, and apparently there are enough of you out there in my viewers playing Duels that this actually still outranked stuff like Battlegrounds Battlemaster, which is pretty exciting. I'm glad the Duels contingent here is speaking up, but a complete surprise. And if you haven't played Duels, this card is just absurdly strong. It's single target removal that summons all these Void Fiends that deal damage to the opponent's face. So it's just like crazy burst damage, really efficient removal, and it punishes you playing high health stuff, which sucks because you want to play big minions, and it's the bane of Duels and the most hated card. And we've got some thoughts here about it from the viewers here. One just says, I mean, come on. I think that sums it up pretty well. Like, there's just too much going on here for a card that's in your base deck as a base treasure. It's absurd. I think Blizzard teased they were looking at stuff like Priest and all these power cards and Duels. So hopefully this or the Priest decks that support it get pulled down in some way or another. So moving into the world of Standard here again, although, you know, these cards certainly pop into Duels too from time to time. This is Celestial Alignment. Druid's big crazy mana manipulator tool here, and as someone put it, the epitome of Druid BS, or alternatively, the decks that revolve around this card almost do not care what opponents play. You cannot counter or anything. If they have the cards, they just win. And I think that'll be a bit of a theme coursing throughout this video. Times that people feel helpless or feel like they don't really get to interact with their opponent's cards create some hateful feelings, and those are the sorts of cards that tend to show up on this list, and as that other person puts it, tend to make people want to quit Hearthstone. Number 8 here really surprised me. Defend the Dwarven District. This is a card, you know, for somebody who is primarily a Standard or Duels player that I don't have a lot of problems with. I don't encounter very often, but I realize we have a lot of Wild players out there voting, and this card is particularly crazy in Wild format, and again makes you feel kind of helpless. So this was really the Wild player base speaking up and describing their hatred for Dwarven District. Basically, as this person puts it, it's a Raza Priest where you're guaranteed to get it rolling on turn 1. Are you kidding me? It's absolutely ruined Wild, the most brain dead card that made Reno Priest irrelevant, worse than Pirate Warrior since they don't need a board. And although I haven't encountered this personally, I can definitely imagine it feels, again, pretty discouraging to see your opponent just spamming cards and whacking you in the face. I remember that from Raza Priest, how frustrating that felt. And if this is doing it earlier and more consistently, that does indeed sound like a nightmare. Moving on to number 7, it's Incanter's Flow. I like this comment. Everyone knows why. And indeed, I think you're right. I agree. The spammy world of Hearthstone these days, where we have this like endless interaction with card discounts and card draw, creates these just scenarios where opponents are playing a million cards for basically 0 mana. And of course, this was super frustrating in Quest Mage, especially when it was still 2 mana, but even today it remains super frustrating as the fuel for Mozaki Mage, which has been popping up as the new most annoying way for most people to play against Mage. So, you know, when it turns out discounting your entire deck is a really big deal, and putting cards at 0 mana is a really big deal, and I don't personally think it's super healthy for the game, so I have to agree here with Incanter's Flow's spot on this list. Next up is Mr. Smite, or as one of you put it, more like Mr. Shite. You guys are stupid, but it worked. I included your comment. You got it in there. Okay, congratulations. But yeah, Mr. Smite was kind of like one of the straws that I think really broke the camel's back for Pirate Warrior. You know, Pirate Warrior was like so cool when it was that like mid-rangey quest deck, and it was like not really all that good, but you could kind of play it, and it felt like this, you know, honest, board-based deck that could like go long with Juggernaut, but it still wasn't like overpowering. But then you get things like Mr. Smite that give it this really lethal finishing tool, and often just like out of nowhere summon off the Juggernaut, or even from hand with other stuff summon off the Juggernaut, and it's like, oh man, okay, we made Pirate Warrior really good. And that's where you start to get frustrating, because cards like the Juggernaut suddenly represent something totally different. This like endless win condition for a deck that's already strong and has finishing potential. That starts to clash. And cards like Mr. Smite that came along to kind of push it over the edge there to make it good become the centerpiece of that frustration in many ways. There was also this undercurrent of people who think it's like a better Leroy, also feeling frustrated, like, hey, we removed Charge and we removed Leroy, but then Mr. Smite comes back and gives everybody access to a neutral Charge. I personally don't find Smite as frustrating there, because he's not as commonly utilized as a sort of Leroy, you know, neutral damage replacement sort of card, only occasionally, and I don't think that holds up as well in modern Hearthstone. So I'm okay with it there, but that was something else people expressed as well for Mr. Shite. Next up is Ticketus. Good old Ticketus, man. Nobody forgot their hatred for Ticketus. This is a card we don't really see as much today, but for a long time there, Ticketus was really frustrating for people who wanted to play long, grindy, attrition-style games. Your opponent would just drop a Ticketus, and suddenly you have this inevitability of fatigue where you just can't outvalue or out-resource your opponent. So that was super frustrating for people who want to play that style. Nowadays, we have like combo decks sort of erasing the same viability for grindy attrition decks to some extent. So that playstyle has felt pretty hard to roll with. But Ticketus was the original offender there, and I like this. This was kind of a simple but insightful statement. Hearthstone is about playing cards, not making other people not play cards. And there is some truth to that, I think. I certainly have fun with mill decks and things too, and Ticketus can be really fun to play, but I understand the frustration that it generates, particularly as you start to play like 2 or 3 of these with philosophies or Yashiraj follow-ups. That gets really frustrating when it feels like, you know, literally half your deck or more is destroyed by functionally a single card in your opponent's deck. I think the second comment actually captured that sort of two-sided coin of Ticketus. It's a feel-bad card. I don't know how to prevent it, but if I was a Warlock main, it would have been my favorite minion. So some people love it, some people hate it. That can be good for the game as long as it's not too popular. For a while there, I think Ticketus was a little too popular. Nowadays, I think that balance feels a little fairer because it's something you run into only rarely. Moving on to Ignite, we've got more mage cards here, and spoiler alert, this won't be the last one. Infinite resources here with Ignite. Again, inevitability, helplessness, a lot of the same themes popping up. One person said, I hate what this card represents. There's no point in running cards that create value because this card can go forever. You can just throw a single copy in, which isn't terrible by itself, so strong at a base level, but then also you negate fatigue entirely. Drawing used to be a risk. Now every deck encourages you to draw all your cards because it's either a combo deck or fatiguing yourself is good. And that's true. We've made drawing basically a no-risk endeavor because cards are cheap when you draw them. You have ways to end the game immediately when you draw a ton of cards, or you don't ever run out of cards because of Ignite. And across those three, it does feel like the end game, that attrition end game of Hearthstone has gone away. And I think a lot of people are expressing that frustration through these choices. We also have this comment I liked: ignite, 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 ignite. It never ends, and I've certainly felt that pain before. Moving on, it's Raid the Docks. Who could have guessed? A card that is really popular in both Wild and in Standard format, and pretty darn good in both. And I already talked about a lot of the problems for this one with Mr. Smite. I think it's just the fact that this is a good aggro deck, and as somebody I think here put it, stapled onto a deck that also has this like end game value machine off of the Juggernaut. When you combine those two, that's frustrating, right? If it was kind of a weak aggro deck or more of a mid-range deck like it was in the past prior to the buffs, prior to new pirates and smite, like I think that was a really healthy spot for Raid the Docks, and I loved it personally in that world because it felt like every sort of chunk of the game was fairly balanced. Now it feels like you've got this really good beginning game opener, like aggro opener, and you've got this good end game as well with the finishers of Smite and Juggernaut value. So it almost feels like there's no weaknesses for the deck anymore to exploit, and that makes it both really popular and really competitive. One person left a comment here, though, that just said, Boulder Fist Ogre. I don't know why. Are they saying Raid the Docks has good stats? Was it a typo? Are they just beaming? I don't know, but it's so insightful to write Boulder Fist Ogre as a comment about Raid the Docks that I felt like it just demanded inclusion. All right, we've got the Mage quest line coming in here too. And this top comment just put it perfectly. This is always what I say about Quest Mage 2. And they wrote, if I wanted to watch someone play games online, I'd watch Twitch. Speaking of which, I know there's a great stream over there, twitch.tv/Regis Kilbin. You should come watch people. Watch me watch other people play Quest Mage. You'll get this really meta experience where we're both watching other people play games. But that's exactly what it feels like sometimes playing Quest Mage. They're just drawing a billion cards, Mozaki Mage 2, just playing 27 cards a turn, and you're just sitting there just watching it unfold, and then you kind of play one minion on curve, and it's like, oh man, they're literally playing the game 10 times as much as I am. And I think that imbalance feels just really bad. It sucks to not really be playing as much as your opponent, which of course, yeah, you can load up your own Quest Mage, but if you don't like that, don't have that card, don't really want to play that playstyle, if you like minion-based combat, you're out of options, right? You can't do the same thing that your opponent's doing. And I think that feels bad. So I absolutely understand this frustration of Watchstone basically through Quest Mage. And then number one, who could have guessed? What? The Demon Seed? Thought people loved this card. Spoiler alert again, it will show up in the most loved video. What spot is the question? Stay tuned tomorrow to find out. But yeah, the Demon Seed took the number one spot. We all knew it was going to take the number one spot, and it was the most decisive victory I've ever seen for a video like this. To give you some numbers, out of 930 people who submitted for this survey, 250, or probably more because of various typos and things I couldn't quite capture cleanly in the data, but over 250, so more than 1/4 of people named the Demon Seed as their most hated card. To give that a little more context, the number 2 card, Mage Quest, was only at 73. That makes it over 4 times as hated as the next best card. And I only had to include one comment here because this is exactly how it feels playing against the Demon Seed most of the time. Guess I'll die. And there you go, folks. The 10 most hated cards in Hearthstone in the year of 2021. I am curious to hear your thoughts. Which ones surprised you? Did you know duels existed? Have you ever seen this card before? What other cards do you think should have been on this list? What are your thoughts on like how we could maybe change these cards or avoid these sorts of problems in the future? I want to hear all those thoughts and more in the comments below. I also want to encourage you to stick around for the rest of this video series throughout the course of the week, where we talk about most loved cards and most hated decks, and the strongest and weakest cards of the year, weakest legendaries in particular, legendaries that sort of failed this year. I encourage you to check that out. So I guess I never asked this, but like maybe subscribe or something, or just stay tuned to the YouTube algorithm for those future videos if you want to see those. But until then, thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.